Hi, I'm Greg Schaefer, and welcome to the 188th conversation here on the virtual CISO moment. John Masserini joins us today. He is the founder and managing partner at SentiCon Security. He is also the voice behind the award-winning blog, Chronicles of a CISO. I love that blog. He's a founding member of BSides of South Florida and so many other things. John, thank you so much for joining us today.
Well, thank you for having me, Greg. By the way, dude, I love that intro. I feel like I'm walking out to the pitcher's mound or something, or it's a WWF. It's just a great intro.
I should ask you to put some flashing lights up or something, or maybe a spinning like disco ball or something. So,
there you
go. And I wish I could say that it was me playing the guitar. It is not, so I'm not that good. But would love to hear about your story, how and why you got started in this wonderful field of information security, and just walk us through to where you're at today.
Yeah, so it's been it's been a wild 30 years, believe it or not. It's I like to say that I got into security before it was the cool thing to do. Kind of stumbled into it a little bit. Back in the early 90s, I was running a application development team for an old consulting company called EDS, and we ran a financial center for about 30 banks up in the Northeast. So sure enough, when the banks went through their audits, our friendly regulators would always end up on our doorstep and want to understand how we're making sure the systems were at that point not even secure, just following good practices and that kind of stuff. I kind of inherently became the auditor or the regulatory guy whenever the auditors or regulators showed up. Kind of my background as an app dev person, school for coding and all that kind of stuff, kind of morphed just by need during this time. So kind of fell into it randomly, I guess, but kind of appealed to me, right? I mean, we did groundbreaking things, like we separated production from test, right? I mean, it seems so basic now, but back then we were running on mainframes and big old Unisys and Burroughs boxes and all sorts of stuff, and so it was kind of still commonplace back then. I eventually really got into the security side of things and ended up down in Charlotte, North Carolina for the same company, for EDS, and built one of the first ever internet trading platforms with them. So they were building this for one of their customers, and I was there as the security liaison. Kind of lasted there for about 3 or 4 years, came back to the Northeast and became a security consultant with a few small firms. VeriSign was at Guardant for a while, and kind of really kind of fell into my own. That's really where I fell in love with the whole industry. Did that for kind of the better part of 6 or 7 years, and eventually became the first CISO for Dow Jones and the Wall Street Journal. Was there for about 6 years, throughout both being Dow Jones and then through the acquisition by News Corp. And then kind of left and built the stock exchange, believe it or not. So I went over, there's one of the fastest stock exchanges in the world. It's called MIAX Options. So I joined there as one of the early hires, and really kind of, couldn't pass up the opportunity to build a security program greenfield, right? We literally were hanging whiteboards, when we started doing this thing and trying to architect everything. Spent 6 years there, moved down to Miami, and became the CISO of a company called Millicom, which is basically a very large mobile phone provider for Latin America. So was there for almost 6 years as well. And now doing my own thing. Spent a little time as an industry analyst, and now founded SentiCon because I love what I do, right? And helping, something you really do focus on, which is the small and medium-sized businesses, and really helping them understand and trying to figure out the whole security space, right? I spent most of my career in the enterprise space, and when you have multi-million-dollar budgets, you can do a lot of good things, but when you don't, and when you're struggling, just kind of keeping your IT running and getting from day to day, when you have things like the government's mandating that you go through all of these different regulatory processes, and you have to be FedRAMP certified or go through some sort of certification process. These small SMBs really struggle with that. So helping with that is kind of where I'm just really loving life right now, helping them understand that and helping them get through that.
We have such parallels in some ways, being first CISO of different organizations, and now coming to the point of loving working with SMBs. And one thing a little bit different, you mentioned that you stumbled into security. I like to call what happened to me is that I was dragged in kicking and screaming because I was in charge of networking and, of course, firewalls and all that. So at some point in time, I realized in like 2005-ish that I was doing more to help block people from talking, but not. But I got to ask you, from just the perspective of, I love talking with folks that have started their own company. The being like, I never envisioned being an entrepreneur myself, but I felt a calling to try to help SMBs. I suspect that there's some of that with you as well. What's one of the challenges that you had, like starting a business?
Yeah, it's funny because it's my main complaint even today. I love what I do, and I can never imagine not being in the security space. I don't do sales, I don't do marketing, I don't do finance, but I have, that's part of what I do every day now. So, this morning I was sending out some invoices and doing some updates to the website. And, that's I just want to deliver. I want to help companies be more secure. I want to really kind of help them move the needle. But, more time than I had expected is being spent on all the back office stuff. Right. And, the easy answer is sure, we can hire somebody. And yeah, I will probably eventually do that. But starting up, you're not going to start writing checks to, accountants and web designers and all that. I mean, at least I didn't find the value in that. So, that's probably one of the biggest challenges I had in doing this. And thankfully, I have a lot of great friends in the finance space, in the marketing space, who really, I guess felt pity on me in some ways, and who really they're like, look, just go do these things and go look at these templates and go do this, and kind of really have helped me along the way. So, grateful for the help, but that's kind of one of the things that I wish I could offload and just deliver, help companies be secure.
And I share a lot of that as well. I hate sales and marketing. I tried cold calling early on and came to the realization that security is really not built for cold calling. It's a trust-based, relationship-based service. But being a small business owner with all of the attributes of what you have to do has given me a little bit better perspective on what my clients have to go through, the SMB space, and including now, one of the first things I did when I started my business was I made sure that I had a security policy in place. It was just me, but I wanted to practice what I preach. And I think that while those back office items, the accounting, the marketing, the sales, and all that stuff, it does get to be difficult. Does help to understand the threats a little bit more. And I know you have such an eclectic career, working large organizations, working now with smaller organizations, and you've seen a lot. Today, from your perspective, what do you think's one or a couple of the most significant threats to information security that SMBs face?
Well, I think unfortunately a lot of people overlook this space when it comes to the overall impact of ransomware and of just I think generally SMBs face the same attack vectors as a lot of the large enterprises. They're just impacted far more, right? And again, we kind of go back to the fact that a lot of the SMBs might have a director of technology, right? They might have two people who are working on Office 365 or doing something. So they're not really staffed to deal with the sheer number of threats that are, and they're not even necessarily targeted threats, but with all of the the actors out there, they're getting hit a lot. And I feel that they're almost to a point where they're just throwing up their hands and saying, whatever's going to happen is going to happen. So I think helping them kind of cull that down and really help them move forward without all of the, like I said, millions of dollars of tools and all that kind of stuff. There's one company I've partnered with that is really it's almost a turnkey security infrastructure, right? They'll monitor for you, they'll deploy, endpoint protection for you, they'll implement email security, and being able to go into one of these SMBs and saying, look, this is a trusted partner of mine. They're able to help you. They're able to take all of this load off of your very limited resources and really kind of move the needle for you. People are just thankful that I'm not telling them to go out and go find a platform, go deploy a slant SIM. You need to find, and some sort of MDR solution. Coming to the table with with a company that I trust and I know, they're almost relieved, right? A couple of times where I've people are like, wait a minute, you have a company that does all of that, and all I have to do is kind of let them in, so that the whole concept of they don't have security teams, and a lot of times their technology people are way over inundated, so they're being able to just go in and help them identify what their major risks are and how to fix it. It seems like there's a lot of value there.
You said something interesting about and I picked up on and maybe I'm reading not exactly what you were getting at, but it did ping something in me, and that was you said something about how we're I don't know if you used the word ignoring SMB security, but maybe not paying as much attention to it. And I see elements of that, like if you go to conferences, for example, and sometimes it seems to me, and maybe I'm oversensitive to this because I work in the SMB space, but it seems to me sometimes that you have the presentations are geared towards the large organizations. Mm-hmm. The vendor trade show floor is geared towards large organizations. I went to one conference, a regional one last year, and I was talking with one vendor that they were talking about their product. It sounded great. It sounded to be something that I definitely use for my clients. And I asked if they had something for the SMB space, and they said they do. And I totally excited. And then without missing a beat, they said, but they're not here. We don't typically bring them to these shows. I'm like, oh, that's the problem. Mm-hmm. Do you see a problem, a challenge, an opportunity within our discipline, our space, that maybe we can be doing better to help the SMB space with regards to information security?
Well, look, I'll be honest. One of the main reasons I kind of put my CSF toolkit out there was for that reason, right? They don't need to go buy a product. They don't need to understand anything more than how Excel works, right? They can go through the process at their leisure. They can have a really good understanding, especially again, when you look at the SMBs that I work with, some of them are really struggling right now with what the government is asking them to do, right? They sell, a widget, or they provide some small service to the government, but the government says, we don't care, right? You have to be able to prove you can satisfy these requirements. So being able to use the toolkit for free, there's no impact. You don't need to be a security expert to understand, hey, do we have multi-factor? Yes or no, right? Do we change our passwords? Yes or no, right? Being able to use that toolkit is really, that's the kind of thing where I think we need more of, right? We need more solutions that aren't around the, multi thousands of dollars of reoccurring expenses, but just something that can help these SMBs get better control over what they do. So, I struggle with the same thing, right? RSA is coming up in a few weeks, and we could probably spend a whole hour talking about the trials and tribulations of RSA. But the reality is, again, a lot of the SMBs don't even go to that, right? They don't have security people who care, that they need products or they need to understand what's changing in the threat landscape, all that kind of stuff. So, finding ways to help that don't incur that large overhead of cost. I think that's one of the reasons why personally, things have been, successful, is because I go in there and I say, look, we can do this. Yes, I'll walk you through it. It's a couple hours of consulting time, but guess what? After you implement some of these things, you can redo it yourself, right? You can show you've made progress. You don't need me again, right? Happy to come in, but you get the tool. I'll step you through it the first time. And then year after year, you can show how you're improving just by yourself. That's the thing I think is lacking for this space.
So yeah, I'm glad that you brought up the toolkit. So that's the NIST Cybersecurity Framework Toolkit that I know you updated for NIST 2.0. They added, if I'm not mistaken, the governance section. I don't know what the actual word is. I'm drawing a blank there. But first of all, I want to say thank you for doing that. You have a heart of a servant, and I would agree that we need more of that effort in our industry, because there's countless folks that you've helped with that simple toolkit that you probably never even hear back from. So I want to make sure that to give folks an opportunity. You said that it's available for download, right?
Yeah, it's on GitHub. Yep.
Okay, so they just go to GitHub and search on NIST CSF Maturity Toolkit?
Yes.
You make it very easy. So within the SMB space, a lot of what the risk is as well too is that, and it sounds like that what you were talking about as far as having a trusted partner to help with some of the things that they don't need to be an expert in per se.
Mm-hmm.
They just need to know that there's someone trusted that'll fix it. Trust is such a major factor in our industry. It's where we were talking before we were recording that really our industry is based, sales are based not so much on cold calling or marketing, but it's based on trust. Yet there could be, I'm kind of stepping into the MSSP space here for a moment. Maybe I shouldn't go down this path, but I'm going to do it anyway. I've seen that there are MSSPs that may not all of them, but that may offer consultative services like virtual CISO or other type services, that then the virtual CISO may recommend a product to fill a gap that they've identified that the MSSP sells. In other words, it almost acts as a inside sales person, and I think that's a problem that can be solved, and I think one of the ways of solving it is to ensure that there's within the MSSP some sort of separation of duties. Do you have any thoughts about that? How because again, this all gets down to what pinged me on that was the word trust. When you recommend a service to a vendor, you want to make sure that or to a client rather, you want to make sure that service, that vendor you're recommending has the client's best interest, the SMB's best interest in mind. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, and it's funny. We've seen that for years. If you bring in, the big four, big five to do, an independent assessment of the security program, sure enough, they're going to come back with recommendations and solution platforms that, oh wow, happen to be a partner, right? So it kind of runs with the territory, and it's a bit sad to say, but it's not something that's new. And that's kind of why I think the ability to earn that trust and say, look, if you can do things online, you can go out and buy a solution, you can use the free solution, the toolkit. There's a lot of varied things you can do. And I think part of the problem is, especially post-incident, right? It's a hair on fire kind of situation where we don't care. We just need this fixed. Bring in whatever solution you think is going to fix our problem, because we need to get back working again. We can't cut bills. We can't access our systems. Whatever the situation is, there's that big push of just get us back to where we were. So I think there's a bit of that when we talk about it. And again, it's, I have to say, for most of the SMBs that I'm dealing with, there isn't a security person, right? There's just a technology person who got, anointed with security responsibility.
So, anointed is a good word.
So helping them, right? And I think, look, as far as I'm concerned, because I appreciated this as a CISO, if you come in wanting to help me and not just sell me, I'll pick up your call more often than not, right?
Absolutely.
Part of what I do is also I help startups who have solutions and platforms, kind of understand how to sell to a CISO and that kind of stuff, and getting them to understand that trust is how you sell in this industry, right?
Right.
It's not you're not selling a widget and you can make it 2 cents cheaper. So, I'm buying 1 million of them, I'll save a lot of money. When it comes to security, if I pick the wrong platform as a CISO, that's my job, right? I can literally be walked out the door if we get breached because I picked product A over product B. So understanding that and understanding how trust ties all that together is very important. When we talk about the SMB space, I think it's in some ways a little easier, right? Because if you're walking in, you're not dealing with, teams of hundreds. You're not dealing with procurement processes. You're not dealing with all this stuff, right? You're there to help them, and they appreciate that, right? So as long as you're on the up and up, and I agree, there are some MSSPs that are just, they use their virtual CISO almost as a, inside sales, a solutions engineer, or whatever it is. But at the end of the day, if there's still a trust there, so if they're still helping them, there's always a fine line there. But I think as long as they get the right product in there and can start moving in the right direction, it's a good thing. Yeah. I personally prefer the independent side of it, right? So I'm not, the partner I have we bring them in, we talk about them, and then they go and run it all, right? And if you want me to help, I'm happy to, and if you don't, that's fine too.
Yeah, keeping things separate can be good for a second line of defense and all that, but all of this brings stress because whether you're full-time CISO doing it fractional part-time, whatever you're doing in the information or cybersecurity space, we're all tasked with doing something which fundamentally is not, we can't achieve 100% security. It can never happen, and sometimes we, at least I can speak for myself, tend to put too much pressure on myself. I want to do better. I want to make sure we're mitigating the risk as much as possible. And we need to have a healthy outlet for that stress. We don't need to internalize. We need to make sure that we're taking care of ourselves so that we can take care of our clients or our employer, whoever that we're working for. What's one of the things, John, that you do to decompress from the stresses of not only information security, but also being an entrepreneur?
Yeah, it's a real quick story. I was all in all a CISO for over 18 years. And when I left my last CISO role, I really had no comprehension on how tightly I was wound. It took, and people who had journeyed, like a lot of my peers who had taken the journey, they said, you're going to be a year before you are right. And I kind of laughed them off. I'm like, nah, I relax. I do, I live in Miami. I go to the beach. We hang out by the pool. So I'm like, I'm good. And let me tell you something, that first year was hard. And I never, ever would have imagined it was as mentally challenging as it was to to kind of get back to a normal life. There was one point where, I was actually sending myself emails because I wasn't getting emails overnight, and I was like, well, my email must be down, right? It was just, it was to a point where I was thinking there's a technology problem because I'm not, the world's not blowing up. So, I will say that anyone who's transitioning out of that CISO role into something different, do not underestimate the amount of stress and what you need to do to decompress. I will tell you right now that, I make a concerted effort to get to the beach, to just relax by the pool. I absolutely love baking, right? So, I'll bake a couple times a month, honestly, just, whatever I feel like doing or making. I do, and we were talking a little bit earlier, I do enjoy my wine, not anywhere near, to relying on it like I used to be quite honest. But I'm a big fan of Napa Valley and Bordeaux and Portugal. So, I do still partake in that kind of stuff, but, quite honestly, nowhere near like I used to. I found other outlets, right? I'm writing a book. Like I mentioned the baking stuff. So finding other ways to kind of let some of that stress out and really kind of decompress on a regular basis is absolutely critical. And again, I thought it was complete nonsense when I was in the seat. And I will tell you, I learned a great deal in that first year about myself.
You're writing a book.
I am writing a book.
Is it information security related or baking related?
It is actually, yeah. There are two in the works. The one that will be done first is information security related. Yeah, it's all about the working title is building an identity management ecosystem. Right? How really, identities and user access are really they're basically our last bastion of security. With everything moving to the cloud and to, all the way we are now versus, again, when I started, when we were doing everything on a mainframe, how, if we don't get control of identity management, then we really stand no chance. Because, every single issue and event that I'm brought into today, at some point, some identity was stolen, right? Some credential was taken over, and they were able to, subvert the rest of the infrastructure with that one credential, right? So understanding how important that is for an enterprise, is really kind of the crux of the book. I've built 3 identity management solutions in all my enterprises. And I firmly do believe that if we don't pay enough attention to it, and we're never going to really move the needle on security until we do.
Awesome. Anything else coming down the road that you want to mention?
No, just you mentioned BSides. That's kind of I love giving back, right? So I've been part of Cyversity for a lot of years now, and now BSides. So we're starting BSides South Florida. Hopefully the event will be we're targeting September for our first South Florida event. So, now I have time to do these other things I've always wanted to do. Yeah. So it's there's, and honestly, part of that kind of goes back to the way to decompress, right? So, giving back and working with Cyversity and getting this BSides, staying in the industry, but yet not having the stress of trying to, protect an enterprise or a company. So, if you're in South Florida, please, reach out and let us know, and we'll add you to the list.
Awesome. Well, when your book comes out, let me know. Maybe we can have you back. We could talk a little bit about the book. I love bringing authors on here, but really appreciate you taking time to chat. Wonderfully insighted conversation. You bring some great thoughts to the industry. Love what you're doing, giving back, and again, thank you so much for your time.
Yeah, thank you for having me. This was great and long overdue. We need to catch up again soon.
Absolutely. Everybody, stay